Hello, you all. Emma Churchman here. So I don't know about you, but I have had a couple of significant times in my life that have really just changed the trajectory of my life. And one of those events happened about a year ago, which I'm going to reveal to you the end product in this box here in just a couple of minutes. But a year ago, Hurricane Helene hit here in our area in Western North Carolina and obliterated our area. It was devastating. We were without power for a month. We didn't know for days if anyone knew whether or not we were alive. We didn't have internet or cell phone signal or anything like that. We were on top of a mountain. It was totally quiet here. We only had contact with our immediate neighbors, and it took us, because our roads were destroyed, it took us 4 days to get down to the fire station to see who else was alive. And we ended up just spending months trying to recover from this immense flooding and mudslides and trees down. And I remember the morning of the hurricane, these gale force winds were coming all around our house. We could hear trees crashing nearby, probably 175 mile an hour winds. And as they started to die down around probably 11 o'clock that morning of September 27th, 2024, I heard this voice in the center of my head, which is where God hangs out, where I often get messages. And God said, "You need to write down what's happening." And I thought, oh, haha, shouldn't I go check on my neighbors, try to preserve the food in our refrigerator since we don't have electricity, see if we can get help, see if we can figure out what the extent of this devastation is. But no, God was very clear, write down what's happening. And so I did. I actually started journaling that morning before I went out to begin clearing trees and checking on neighbors, and started to write down the story of what was happening. And I did that for the first 40 days. And what was really interesting about that is that once I was able to get on social media, I did it first through my husband's account because we got his cell phone to work, mine still wasn't working, and started sharing what was happening in our community, what we were learning about the devastation. I began volunteering as a trauma chaplain. I was sharing some of the stories of people I was working with who were impacted by the hurricane. As I started sharing these stories on social media, thousands of people started following my story. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. But, my cell phone wasn't really working, so I could read some comments, but not all of them, and I couldn't really reply to comments. But I just kept getting this voice of write down what's happening. So every night, or, when I was at the fire station, I would write on a notes app on my phone, write down stories of what was happening. And I was sharing this, and I was starting to get the feedback that what I was sharing was radically different than what the media was portraying about Hurricane Helene. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. But really, I was in such a traumatized state, I couldn't even remember what I had eaten for breakfast. So I wasn't really tracking a lot of the details or the significance of what was happening with me sharing this story. And a couple weeks into that process, as I was learning how to attend to my own trauma recovery, as I was helping other people attend to theirs, people started saying, well, you should write a book. And I thought, oh, that's a great idea. But, we're still trying to get power. We're still trying to make sure we have food to eat. We're still, in the middle of rescue and recovery for our neighbors down in Bat Cave in Chimney Rock. I don't have the bandwidth to find a literary agent or approach a publisher. I don't have internet access very often. So I like that in concept, but not in execution. But I kept writing these stories. And then one day God said to me, put out and ask for a publisher on Facebook where you're sharing these stories. And I thought, okay, well, what do I have to lose? And within 24 hours, a publisher reached out to me and said, we would acquire that, right? We would take this on and turn it into a book. And I thought, oh, that seems too easy. So I reached out to the publisher, and we had a very brief conversation, 40 days passed after the hurricane. where the head of the publishing company, Grace Point Publishing, said, yes, we do want to acquire this, and we want it to be the first book out about Hurricane Helene on the market. We want to get it out by February 1st. Now, remember, the hurricane was September 27th. We want to get it out by February 1st, which was a 45-day turnaround. And me, not knowing anything about writing a book, editing a book, designing a book, getting it printed, getting it distributed, said, oh, sure, that sounds great. Right? Really not knowing what I was getting myself into. But we managed to get the book out. It came out February 1st. It's called The Deep End of Hope in the Wake of Hurricane Helene, 40 Days and Nights of Survival and Transformation. And it shares the stories of the first 40 days following the hurricane. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. As I was talking with the publisher about the deep end of what is now the deep end of hope in the wake of Hurricane Helene, she said, you know, it would be really good if you shared your own history of trauma, you know, your own childhood, physical, sexual, emotional abuse. And I said to her kind of flippantly, oh yeah, I'm already writing a book about that, right? I had already started writing my memoir that year in January of 2024. I decided after 20 years of kind of hemming and hawing, I'm going to write a book about being raised by a mother with 123 personalities. And the story of not only my father dying by suicide 25 some years ago, but also all three of my brothers dying by suicide, including 2 in the past year. One was about a month before Hurricane Helene, and one was 2 weeks after. And the publisher said, we would like to acquire that book too. Now, when they say acquire, what a publisher means is we are going to pay for the editing, the development, the layout and design, including the cover, plus the interior layout and design, the distribution, the marketing, like all of it, they were going to take on. And so in that moment on November 4th, 2024, she agreed to acquire 2 books. And I began to think, wow, you know, this feels to me like a trilogy. It feels like there are 3 different aspects of what it means to live in trauma, what it means to recover from trauma, and what it means to become a resilient human being. And so as I was writing and working with the developmental editor for the second book, which is called Unshattered, which is in this box right here, I also had the idea for a third book. But let me pause because I want to show you these books because I'm very excited about them. This is my first time seeing them too. It's a tremendous experience to go from taking an idea in your mind and turning it into a 3D reality. And the process of writing a book, for anyone who has done it or hasn't done it, it's tremendous. It really calls you to go deep and to look at what were those stories that were the most pivotal. What were those experiences that not only were transformational for me, but that other people are going to be able to relate to and understand and utilize for their own healing and their own evolution. So a lot of those stories in this book, Unshattered, come from that place of wanting to understand not only what trauma is and what the impact of trauma is, but also how some people become resilient in the face of trauma and how others don't. And my family is a really good example of that because we have both types of stories. We have the people like me who said to themselves, this is happening for me, not to me, and found ways to move through. And then we have people like my father or my brothers who said, I can't deal with this. I can't do this. I don't want to be in this world anymore, and chose a different path. So all of those stories are in this book, which I'm excited to share with you. This has really been, I want to say, I guess the catchphrase would be a labor of love. It doesn't feel like a labor, but it does feel it feels very exposing, especially to talk about so many of these family stories that have never been told, right? Because we were told, as many people who experience trauma are told, don't tell anyone what happened, right? This isn't for public consumption. This is just for our family to know about. So a lot of these stories have been inside me for close to 5 decades, right? Since I was a little girl. So here's the book, Unshattered: Surviving My Mother's 123 Personalities and Transforming a Legacy of Abuse. And the picture on the cover is me when I was about 1 year and 3/4 old, when a lot of the abuse began. So you can see, you're also looking at the 51-year-old version of me. You can see the transformation over the years. And my husband jokes that I look exactly the same, except for that the child version of me doesn't have glasses. So for any one of you who's feeling like I can't tell my story, or we need to keep this secret, or it's not safe, I want to share with you that it's possible. It's possible to share what's hardest about you, because that can be a part of your healing process. Now, I'm not someone who identifies as a victim of domestic violence or even a survivor of domestic violence. I'm someone who identifies as resilient. And that's what this book is really about. It's not about being a label or being someone who simply kind of got through. It's about becoming that next version of yourself who can be exactly who you want to be, who can live a resilient and abundant life. And that's why this book is part of a trilogy. So we've got The Deep End of Hope in the Wake of Hurricane Helene, which is really about moment by moment how I navigated a significantly traumatic event and how I helped other people to do the same. And then we've got the backstory, which is Unshattered, how I became this version of me. The experiences, the trauma, and the healing, because there's a lot of healing in this book that led me to this particular place at this particular time. And then I had mentioned earlier that this is a trilogy. And the reason it's a trilogy is because I've got a 3rd book coming out in June of 2026, also acquired by Grace Point Publishing. Thank you so much. And this book is about resilient leadership, how to navigate as a leader in a volatile world. The book is called Navigating the Deep End: Resilient Leadership in a Volatile World. And you'll hear more about that in the next couple of months. But really, that book highlights case studies, in addition to my own story, of choosing to be leaders in very volatile situations. Everything from hurricanes to COVID-19 to personal health scares to family situations, lots of different types of trauma that leaders can experience, and how leaders choose to navigate those really unexpected experiences. So this trilogy is all coming out within 18 months, which is pretty unheard of to have an author publish 3 books in 18 months. But I felt so called to have all 3 of these books out as soon as possible, because we're in a time of massive volatility. Even if you have not personally experienced a natural disaster, which by the way have increased by 300% in the past decade, 300% people. Even if you haven't been impacted personally by a natural disaster, you have been impacted by political or economic upheaval, societal upheaval, cultural upheaval. There is so much that is happening on our planet right now that we have run out of time to spend a decade on a therapist's couch processing our feelings, right? We have to really figure out how to, in the moment, recover our own trauma. That's what these books are about. So that we can, in the moment, learn how to attend to ourselves, to our feelings, to our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being, and make powerful decisions and be resilient at the same time. So 2 things for you all to do right now. One is pre-order the book, Unshattered, which is available anywhere online books are sold. So you could go to Amazon, bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble in Canada, Indigo Books, or Chapters, anywhere online books are sold. So the release date is October 27th, 2024. And then I'm going to be doing a virtual book launch on Tuesday, October 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern. I would love for you to join. Registration is required, although the event is free. If you're not able to attend live, you will get a recording. I'm going to put a link to register for the book launch below this video. I'd love for you to join me. You're going to hear from me some of the backstory about how this book was created and how I decided to tell these stories, which have never been told publicly. You'll also hear from my publisher about their decision to acquire this book. You'll hear from my developmental editor about what it was like to work on crafting these stories into a comprehensive book. And there'll be some prizes and some giveaways. So again, I'll put a link below this video. I would love to see you there. All right, you all, many blessings to you, and bye for now.